Breaking overnight, U.S. and Iraqi forces trying to drive extremist militants from Iraq's largest hydroelectric dam. Now, U.S. warplanes, we know, have struck ISIS terror targets in northern Iraq, which has become a battleground for ISIS, really, as its militants overrun town after town there. We're joined by CNN senior international correspondent Nick Payton-Walsh right now. He's in Erbil in northern Iraq. And CNN military analyst Lieutenant General Mark Hertling is with us from Orlando. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for being here. Nick, I want to start with you. What is the latest on the airstrikes there? Are they still ongoing this hour?
As far as I understand, it is a heavy bombardment. I don't quite know if bombs are dropping as we speak, but yes, there's no sign to suggest that it's letting up at all at this stage. The question is, when do ground forces potentially get involved? The targets that have been hit appear to be what are referred to as mobile ISIS units. That would be the vehicles, some of them purloined from the Iraqi army, who got them from the Americans in turn. They appear to have been the targets in many different areas around the dam, apparently a 32-kilometer reach from the actual hydroelectric facility, the largest in Iraq itself. As I say, the question is now, when do we start seeing potentially on the ground Peshmerga, that's Kurdish militant forces, moving towards the dam? Will they potentially even have US Special Forces with them to assist guiding the missiles that land, but also what's going to be an extraordinarily messy operation to retake this facility? ISIS still have engineers trying to keep it running. The question is, how do you really fight over something as fragile and massively important as this dam without causing damage to it and risking the potential damage that could cause to the thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who live beneath its waterways? Yeah,
that's a fierce yet delicate fight there. Bob Baer yesterday, as I go to you, General Hertling, Bob Baer, former CIA operative, said that ISIS is much more potent than Al-Qaeda. Do you believe that to be true? And if so, how do we fight them?
Well, I definitely believe that to be true, Christy. They have several strengths that were just okay in Al-Qaeda. They have significant amount of cash that they've stolen from banks. They've basically occupied the oil facilities, and they're getting a lot of money there. They have better leadership and more centralized leadership within Iraq and Syria than Al-Qaeda did. Iraq was a sideshow, I think, at the time for Al-Qaeda. They were there in order to fight Americans, and at the end of their tour there, they decided to try and establish a caliphate. That's the primary goal of ISIS right now, is to establish that caliphate and have their own state there in Iraq. So they are much more powerful.
Nick, I want to go back to you real quickly, because we've heard some pretty horrifying reports this morning of ISIS taking over a village and massacring some men and kidnapping some women. What do you know about that?
Well, this one village apparently had 80 men killed in it, and then over 100, perhaps, women and children taken away from it. A village close to Mount Sinjar, where so much of these Yazidis had fled to and since escaped into Kurdish or Syrian territory. Now, we don't know a lot more about this. It's coming from Kurdish sources, still to be verified properly on the ground, but it fits into a broader pattern, though, of what we see ISIS militants doing when they take territory with those who they regard as infidels, the unfaithful non-Muslims upon it. Yes, the men are killed, and the women and children, as we've heard from an ISIS commander himself in the past week, they give the women and children a chance to convert to Islam, and if they don't, then further punishment awaits. But a worrying pattern here for the ethnic minorities in this part of Iraq as ISIS moves forwards. The most horrific potential visions they had of what life under ISIS would look like being realized.
General Hertling, I know that some people who fought in the Iraq War, their families are watching this and they're horrified because they think, did we fight for nothing? And Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson said that his concern is that ISIS has gotten to some Americans who may train with the group and then come home to the U.S. to attack. Do you think that that is indeed a real threat? And how are they enticing Americans?
Well, let me answer your first question about Americans who fought in Iraq. I think it's critical for our soldiers, our Marines, our Airmen, our Navy to understand that what they did there was provide an opportunity for Iraq to go forward. Unfortunately, during a period of time, that was squandered to a degree. We see indicators that Mr. al-Abadi, the new Iraq Prime Minister, is going to bring that back, and he has support from others. So I think this is just a cycle of history, and the American military who fought there there, and the State Department, who fought there as well, did a great service to Iraq, and I think we're attempting to bring that back. Unfortunately, ISIS is it's a jihadist movement. It's an extreme religious assault on moderate Islam, and it's unfortunate that they're taking a look at the territories of Iraq to build their caliphate. It's got to be fought. It could come home to the homeland. They are certainly recruiting jihadis from around the world and from all different cultures. That's unfortunate. But I think the Iraqi government will attempt to stop that in the next few months and years, and it'll be critical for the security of all of the world to stop this movement.
Okay. Nick, one more question to you. Of course, the general just mentioned the new regime there in Iraq, the new government. How willing do you think will the Sunnis be? Because you need to get, you have the Kurds and you've got the Shiites. You've got to get the Sunnis involved on their side. How willing will they be to come back to the government of Iraq?
Well, there are some indications. The problem is that Haider al-Abadi is really from a completely new cloth than Nouri al-Maliki. Many, though, including Barack Obama, are thinking that this prime minister designate, now Nouri al-Maliki has finally stepped aside, that al-Abadi has the chance to potentially unite the country. It's a very difficult challenge. There are some signs that there are Sunni tribal leaders willing to perhaps rise up against ISIS. They've done that in the past against al-Qaeda affiliates in Iraq. But it's an extraordinarily urgent task, and one that has to overcome years of suspicion and hostility. Nouri al-Maliki, the now outgoing prime minister, having spent, many say, frankly, all his efforts since the Americans left town, fomenting sectarian division here. The Sunnis deeply suspicious. Potentially, many say, the communities where ISIS are finding sanctuary at the moment, they have to really come on board with the government of Iraq if ISIS are actually going to get expelled from those communities where they are now.
All right, Nick Peyton Walsh and General Mark Hertling, we appreciate it so much. Thank you, gentlemen. And we'll be right back.
Discover Card.
Hey, I heard you guys can help me with fraud protection.
Sure, we help with fraud protection. If there are unauthorized purchases on your Discover Card, you're never held responsible.
You are saying frog protection.
Fraud.
Frog.
Fraud.
I think we're on the same page.
At Discover, we treat you like you'd treat you. Fraud protection. Get it at discover.com.
This allergy season, will you be a sound sleeper or a mouth breather? A mouth breather. How do you sleep like that? Well,